Tapes were spinning in a dark room in 2001 while executives watched a city explode on screen. This was not a movie for adults, but a cartoon for kids called Constant Pain. The action was intense and the stakes were higher than anything ever seen on the channel. It was supposed to be the next big hit. Then, everything stopped. The project was deleted from the schedule and the creator was told it would never air. This is just one example of the forbidden history hidden within the orange splat. The truth is quite unsettling. Nickelodeon spent millions of dollars over the years creating content that never saw the light of day. For starters, the most famous example is a show called Constant Pain. This was developed in 2001 by a creator named Michael Turner. He was well known for his work on comic books like Witchblade. The style was unlike anything else on the channel at the time. It looked exactly like high-end anime with detailed machines and massive explosions. The story followed a father and daughter who lived in a world of airships and mechanical warriors. This is a key detail because the pilot was fully finished and looked incredible. But here's the catch. The show was scheduled to launch right around the time of the September 11th attacks. The world changed in a single day, and the network executives became terrified of showing anything with intense action or buildings being destroyed. They decided to pull the plug on the entire series before it could even air. What most people do not realize is that the pilot cost a fortune to make, yet it was locked in a vault for decades. It's not that simple though, because fans eventually found clips of it online years later. The action was so intense that many people think it would have been the most successful action show on the channel. Instead, it became a ghost. Another major project that vanished was called The Modifiers. This happened much later in 2010. It was created by Chris Riccardi and Lynn Naylor. The pilot was a 60s spy-themed show with a female lead who could change her appearance. Hands down, it was one of the most stylish things ever pitched to the network. There are still many rumors on the air, but what many can confirm is that the show was passed over despite being a hit with fans who saw it online. The animation was fluid and the characters were very cool. Some say the network did not want another spy show at the time, but the real reason remains a mystery. Nobody expected this to happen, but the pilot leaked and became a cult classic. Basically, it proves that even great art can be rejected for reasons that have nothing to do with quality. These two shows represent a time when Nickelodeon was willing to take big risks on darker or more mature themes. When those risks felt too dangerous, the tapes were simply hidden away. It's crazy to think about how different the channel would look today if these shows had been part of the regular schedule. The amount of money lost on these rejected ideas is staggering. For example, a single pilot could cost over $500,000. When you multiply that by dozens of rejected projects, you're looking at tens of millions of dollars in wasted animation, and that's putting it lightly. The history of these banned files is a reminder that what we see on screen is only a tiny fraction of what actually gets made. There are also many stories about shows that were changed so much that the original version is completely gone. One example is a stop-motion show that featured characters living in a landfill. The pilot was called Trash, and it was made in 1990. It showed a world where characters were made of broken pieces of plastic and metal. The tone was very bleak and the lighting was dark. It looked like a post-apocalyptic movie for toddlers. Nickelodeon decided it was too depressing and never aired it. The footage remains lost to this day, with only a few still images ever surfacing. It is a reminder that the early days of the network were full of experiments that were often too weird for the general public. Wait until you see the twisted faces of famous heroes. Sometimes a show makes it to air, but the version people saw was a sanitized copy of a much creepier original. See, many beloved characters started as designs that were honestly unsettling. Jimmy Neutron is a perfect example of this. Before the movie and the hit series, there was a 1995 short called Runaway Rocket Boy. This was the first time Jimmy ever appeared in 3 dimensions. The crazy part is that he looked almost nothing like the boy genius we know. His skin was pale and his face was much more angular and thin. He wore a striped shirt and had a look in his eyes that felt very cold. The animation was done on early computers and had a low resolution quality that made everything feel ghostly. It looked more like a test for a horror movie than a kids show. The backgrounds were dark and the atmosphere was eerie. What most people do not realize is that this prototype was only a few minutes long, but it was enough to convince the network there was potential. They just knew they had to make him look less like a haunted doll. Then there's the case of the Backyardigans. Most people remember this as a bright and colorful CGI show for toddlers. But here's the deal. In 1998, it started as a live-action pilot called Me and My Friends. This version featured actors inside giant animal costumes. These costumes were about 6 feet tall and looked very heavy. The problem was that the faces did not move. The eyes were wide and static, which created a very creepy effect for anyone watching. Imagine a giant pink creature with unmoving eyes dancing in a park. It was nightmare fuel for many people who saw the leaked footage. The network realized quickly that live-action suits were a bad idea for this concept. It's not that simple though, because they kept the characters and the music, but moved everything to a computer-generated world. This saved the show, but left a very weird tape in the archives. Another strange prototype involves the Fairly OddParents. In the original pilot from 1997, Cosmo was not the silly and dim-witted character he became. He was much more sarcastic and had a deeper, creepier voice. He acted more like a smooth-talking salesman than a fairy godfather. The animation was rougher and the colors were much darker. Wanda also had a different look and a more serious personality. It felt like a show aimed at teenagers rather than kids. The creator, Butch Hartman, eventually changed the tone to be faster and funnier. These early versions show that the creative process is often about removing the weirdness until something safe remains. Even Dora the Explorer had a pilot in 1999 that was very different. Dora had a much rounder face and the animation was choppy. It did not have the same educational feel yet. It was just a strange test that felt like it belonged on a different channel. These tapes are the ancestors of the shows we know, but they feel like they come from a different dimension. Something even filthier is hiding in the studio trash. In the early 90s, Nickelodeon was experimenting with styles that were very gross and dirty. This was the era of Ren and Stimpy, so the network was open to things that were a little disgusting. However, some things were too much even for them. There was a lost pilot from 1990 called Trash. This was a stop-motion project about a world made entirely of garbage. The characters were living pieces of trash that resided in a massive landfill that was over 100 feet high. The tone was incredibly bleak and felt like a post-apocalyptic story for children. The animation was gritty and everything looked stained and broken. There was no bright color to be found. It was a very artistic approach, but the network worried it was too depressing. They thought kids would be grossed out by characters that were literally made of filth. See, the show never made it past the pitch stage, but the footage that exists shows a very high level of craft. It is one of those rare cases where a show was pulled because it was too effective at being gross. Around the same time, the show Real Monsters was being developed. Most people know the version that aired in 1994, but the original 1993 pilot was far more grotesque. The character designs were much sharper and more menacing. Ickis looked like a mangy rabid animal instead of a cute red monster. Albina was much more snake-like and her movements were fluid and unsettling. The Monster Academy was a dark, damp place that felt like a real sewer. What many can confirm is that the network asked the creators to soften the edges. They wanted the monsters to be spooky, but still marketable as toys. The original pilot was tucked away and replaced with a version that used brighter colors and softer shapes. Even with these changes, the show was still one of the edgiest on the channel, but the prototype remains a glimpse into a much darker version. It shows that the network was constantly pulling back from the edge of true horror. These rejected concepts prove that there was a very fine line between being cool and being too scary. There were also rumors of a show called The Boneheads, which was about a group of skeletons. The pilot was supposedly made in 1996, but was never shown because it focused too much on the afterlife. The network felt that skeletons were fine as secondary characters, but a whole show about them was a bit too macabre for their afternoon block. It just goes to show that Nickelodeon had a very specific idea of what was acceptable. Discover which show was actually too violent for TV. Looking back at these projects, one has to wonder if the network made the right choice. On one hand, protecting children from content that is too intense or scary is the job of a kids network. On the other hand, many of these pilots were incredibly creative and pushed the boundaries of what animation could do. For starters, Constant Pain would have been a visual masterpiece that likely would have aged very well. The prototypes like Runaway Rocket Boy show us that even the best ideas start with a little bit of weirdness. It is important to realize that for every show we love, there is a dark version that was deemed unfit for the world. So here's the deal. The vault at Nickelodeon is not just a place for old tapes. It is a graveyard of ideas that were too bold or too strange for the time they were made. As the years go by, more of this lost media is being found by fans. People are obsessed with seeing the original versions of their favorite creators. It makes one wonder if we're missing a key detail in the history of television. Perhaps some of these shows would have been massive hits if they were given a chance today. The thing is, the industry is much more open to dark themes now than it was 20 years ago. We are seeing a slow leak of these forbidden files, and each one tells a story of a risk that a network was not ready to take. These pilots are a testament to the fact that creativity often goes beyond what is considered safe. They remain as echoes of a darker, weirder Nickelodeon that almost existed. The most shocking part is that some of these tapes are still fully lost. No amount of internet searching can bring them back because they only exist on a single physical reel in a climate-controlled room. We might never know the full extent of the weirdness that went on behind those studio doors. But as long as people keep searching, the truth will continue to trickle out. It is a reminder that childhood is not always as bright and colorful as it seems on TV. There is always a shadow lurking behind the bright orange logo. Were these shows actually dangerous for kids, or was the network just scared to take a risk? Leave a comment with your thoughts, like the video, and subscribe for more.